only chapter for today under JavaScript. It's Angular. And the speaker is Anshul Kandelwal. He's VP for Data and Engineering Efforts at Mumbai. He's coding for more than 6 years. And his love for programming includes JavaScript and Ruby. Anshul, take it away.
Hey everyone. So the talk today is about AngularJS. So how many of you have used Angular before?
I've used it for a simple assignment.
The simple assignment?
First time I'm hearing of it.
Oh. So I was told that Angular sessions happened here already, so this was slightly aimed at a more advanced level. But I guess we can emphasize more on the, I'll go through a brief look into the starting concepts too.
Okay, let's ask this. How many knows at least another JavaScript framework?
Backbone.
Backbone, Ember, Kick,
Maybe.
Knockout.
Kick. This will be interesting. Okay, so fine. This is kind of a look at the AngularJS internals. So it is sort of a bit advanced, but one of the things I was trying to do here was sort of go through go and look at it from a basic level too. So maybe this will still make sense to.
See, let me give another thing. I think the Angular is a little more, it's quite simple in that sense. If you have basic programming, jQuery, and what do you have, it's not bad to take it up from there. It's not easier. Actually, that's one of the USP. It's not a big ramp up. To take you from where you are to Angular.
Okay, so yeah, let's begin. Let's take a look at AngularJS internals. Well, this is not the intro slide to Angular, but yeah. So for those of you who have used Angular before, Angular can feel a bit magical, right? It does a bunch of things out of the box. And it's magic sort of that just works. There's like, you usually don't feel that you go through sort of the internals or look behind the scenes in Angular, mostly because if you just know how to use the concepts, you can get your way around. It's magic that just works, right? This is sort of a very simple Angular app. Forget the body underscore. My syntax highlight was throwing up. So, but
Okay, one minute, sorry, can you zoom that? Is that the maximum? Just shut off the lights also.
Can you decrease the resolution?
Resolution?
Yeah.
I'm using the same.
Don't do anything that breaks, huh? That's important to do. No, it's for the camera apparently. Okay.
Come on,
I think so now it should be more.
The camera, you can zoom the camera. No? Zoom what? Maximum.
Is it any? Can we change the resolution?
Change the resolution, right?
The screen resolution. It's really basic, the smallest sort of Angular app you can have. So in Angular you have this concept called, so in Angular you have this concept called Angular expressions, right? And what Angular is going to do is it's going to identify things inside those curly braces and evaluate them automatically and put a 2 there. So you can see this running. Right. That basically works. The paid source, as you can see, is this, right? So Angular can sort of do this. This is basically interpolation. This is parsing, right? There's an Angular expression language, and Angular is parsing here to evaluate 1 plus 1 and replace it at runtime with 2. This is a powerful parsing language. It can do basically a lot of stuff. And this basically allows in Angular HTML to become the template, right? Most like you've used Backbone or something, right? There's Usually you have a templating language. You write your template in something, and then it gets compiled into DOM. So like in Backbone, Backbone.render will pick up a Backbone view, merge it with your model, and give you the DOM. Right? That's how Backbone works. Angular, the philosophy is a bit different. We use the DOM itself as the template. So here we have basically, this is your regular DOM. There's no spatial, there's nothing spatial about it. It's just regular DOM. Angular is able to identify it, pick it up, and do things with it. Right? So for Angular, the HTML itself is the DOM. And there's this ng app which describes which part of the HTML page is an Angular app. So you can put this ng app on body, which makes this whole thing an Angular app, and that's why Angular is passing this. If this ng app wasn't there, Angular would not pass this, and you would not get to here. So this works, right? You just saw this working. This is a basic Angular app that works. This is another Angular app that would still work. So what does this do? This has, okay, so I guess I'll have to do a brief Angular refresher, right? So this is how things work in Angular. You have ng app, which describes the Angular app. Then you typically have some ng control or something which basically defines an Angular controller. The controller is kind of optional. And then the way Angular works it attaches attributes and new kinds of elements to your HTML. It increases the HTML vocabulary. Like you have ng model here. ng model tells Angular that whatever is the content of this input should be stored in a variable called name. Okay, and that hello name will resolve that. So whatever you type in that input box will be visible below, real time, two-way bound. So yeah, I can demo this too. Right. Notice that right now the content of the box is basically undefined. So Angular does not throw up when it does that. Like the Angular expressions, they just ignore bad things, right? So this just flows. And I can say Mumbai. And it says Mumbai. As you can see, this is completely live. Whatever I do will be replicated. This is what we call data binding in Angular. What's happened here is that
Just to control you.
Okay. The OS X command shortcuts are different. So yeah. So as you can see, basically what Angular does is it picks up, it comes to this input, it takes ng model. ng model basically. So there's a concept of scope in Angular. How many of you know what Angular scope is? Okay.
I tried to learn, but still.
Yeah, I think we really need to do a Angular basic talk here then. Okay, so Angular concepts, right? Let's do a brief. So let me then go ahead, show you another example of Angular. Then we'll do a brief discussion about Angular itself. And then we'll see if we have time for internals and where we can go with it, right?
Okay.
So here's another example. As you saw it work, whatever you wrote above came down, right? Cool, right? To do that in jQuery would take how many lines? You have an input box, whatever's typed there should show up in a div below.
2 lines.
Huh?
2 lines.
2 days, yeah.
2 lines.
2 lines. Okay, 2 lines. How?
Dollar key press.
Yeah.
Inner HTML.
Yeah. Cool. So key press and then inner HTML, right? Now let's look at this example. This is not something to make sense right now. Maybe this one. So this is the same thing, except except here what's happening is that whatever you type in that input box will automatically be put. So yeah, this is a good example. Let's go over this, right? So you have an NG app. Okay, this is an Angular, what we call an Angular app. Inside that we have an Angular controller, right? This is an Angular controller, line 17. Okay, inside the Angular controller we have ng model and we have an ng click, right? What this does is whatever, okay, how do I explain this? Right. So in Angular parlance, there's a module. Okay, module has controller, right? A controller has a scope, and on the scope is like a regular JavaScript object. Whatever is defined on the scope is two-way bound between the JavaScript environment and the DOM environment, right? So here we say input ng model equals name. This basically binds whatever we type here to $scope.name. Okay, whatever you type here will become $scope.name and Angular will be able to pick it up. Is it too bright or something?
Yes, sir.
So yeah, I have what do I do?
No, I mean
Since I explained it to anyone, so
no, go ahead. I mean, it's just simple. I mean, if you look, the major concept is scope, which you're talking about.
yeah,
Controllers, the interaction, how they happen.
the way, so everyone here has created some JavaScript applications, at least I hope. Who here has not created a JavaScript application?
That's good.
Who here is, so
Next question: how many apps, Java apps, have you created? JavaScript apps.
yeah,
How many?
so like how many of you have used jQuery at least? How many of you know, say, what is prototype in JavaScript? Can you raise your hands more fully? So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So 5 people know JavaScript roughly well, and I think about most of you know at least jQuery functionally, right? You know that you can do so $hash something, find the object, append HTML to it, remove HTML from it. And stuff. How many of you know what is DOM? Please raise your hands fully. Thank you. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 people don't know what is DOM. Okay, so let's start from there then. Okay, so this is a browser, right? What does, so you write your code in a text file, right? You write HTML in a text file. HTML is pure text file, right? And let's say this has no JavaScript. So let's say you have a HTML file which has an input box on it and I don't know, a form on it and a submit button. Okay, so you open the HTML box in a HTML page in a browser, and you get basically a form. You can type stuff, you hit submit, and the browser does things, right? How does all of this work? How do browsers handle all of this? Where does that HTML file, which was just a piece of text, become this functional application, right? So what happens is this. What happens is that the browser, it starts reading your HTML file. As it reads your HTML file, it starts creating internally what's called DOM. DOM stands for Document Object Model. So it basically takes all those text things and creates an object tree out of it, which is referenced by document. So you'll have a global in your JavaScript space. So you have a JavaScript environment and you have the DOM. The DOM is identified by document global in the JavaScript space. So browser sees your HTML file. It creates a JavaScript environment for you for that particular page, right? In this JavaScript environment, it publishes something called document. which basically is an object model for the HTML that it has read. Okay, so it takes your HTML file, it passes this into a document object model. Once it gets this document object model, it renders this document object model. Now this is an object model, it has all the properties of that object, all the CSS properties, all the width, height, every property of the object is there. And in Chrome, F12, right, you said, you can press F12 as I've been just told to see this. So this is the parsed HTML for this page, right? This is how Chrome has gone past your HTML, right? For every HTML, like let's just pick up this, right? This is say the body tag. This is the body's object version. This is what the DOM looks like for that body, right? It's got all these attributes, right? And this is what the browser knows about sort of this DOM. And it's a tree. It's got children, and every children is another DOM object, right? So number one concept, the browser basically goes, takes your HTML document and creates a DOM out of it. Okay, everyone with me on this? Cool. Stop me, ask me questions if anyone's not following it. Next, what happens is if there are any script tags, style tags, the browser will read them, merge them into the DOM. If there are JavaScript objects, they'll be executed in the JavaScript context, which will basically result in more JavaScript code getting executed, which can then publish globals, can do various things. Okay. Then the browser has something called an event queue. Every time you move a mouse, click on something, do anything, the browser converts that action into an event, puts it in the event queue. And various DOM elements and various JavaScript code and various browser primitives can register for these events. And they say that, you can say that basically when this event happens, run this function, right? So as you do events, they enter the event queue. For every event in the event queue, the browser will basically pause, look for any thing that is registered to run whenever that event is fired. If it finds something, it will do that. This is how your form works, right? When you type A, the browser basically changes the DOM, puts its value to A, fires the key press event, down key event, tons of events basically, and those you can trap or ignore. And then when you hit submit, the click event is fired. The browser itself has a default action for this, so it does the default listener for this click event, which is in the case of a forms submit button, the submit event. And this is how the whole browser works, right? So basically browser looks at your HTML, creates a DOM out of it, there's this event queue, people can register for various events, and when events happen you can have code execute in the JavaScript. This is how basically a dynamic JavaScript application gets built, right? Typically when you want something non-static to happen, something you know, some movement, something, anything like that, you know, type as you go, replication happening at the bottom thing I demoed, right? When you want something like that to go on, basically what you want to do is you want to register, you want to notice when a particular event happens, and you want to in response manipulate the DOM, right? This is basically the philosophy of how a dynamic JavaScript application works, right? This is where your jQuery comes in. Your jQuery, you are saying when $a.click this function, it's basically doing this. It's registering for the click event. When the click event comes, it fires a function. In that function, you are actually picking up finding DOM elements by saying I don't know $p to find the paragraph element, and then append HTML, which is basically manipulating the DOM. Once the JavaScript event loop finishes, the browser figures out, okay, these DOM elements have changed, so it re-renders those parts of the pages, and you get your whatever you typed below there, right? This is basically generally how jQuery works, right? Now when you are writing a web app, typically, what are you doing? You are basically, your basic thing in life is that you have something, right? You get some data from the server, let's say, right? You get some data from the server. We basically spend time doing two primary tasks, if you observe clearly. One is fetch data from the server, modify DOM in response to it. Okay, right? That's one thing you do. The other thing you do is DOM has changed. User did something, I don't know, typed something, pressed something, clicked something, did something. Right? The DOM has changed, the event is triggered. Take the data from there, read the data from all this DOM, compile it, send it to a server. Right? These are basically, in any complex JavaScript application, the two things which take the maximum number of code lines. Right? This gets very tedious very fast. Right? Though your HTML soup is now completely tightly coupled with the JavaScript environment. Right? You relabel this element, A ka link bana, JavaScript's gone, you need to rewrite your jQuery. Right? Or the CSS name has changed, rewrite your jQuery. Your jQuery, basically your JavaScript is completely aware of what the DOM is, and the DOM is completely aware of the jQuery. Right? It actually has JavaScript colon this and that triggered here or there. Or actually that's the way it used to be. jQuery kind of fixed that. jQuery said that don't do that. You know, here in the JavaScript, pick the element and attach a callback. So the element doesn't have to know about you, but you still have to know about the element, right? What this results in typically is humongous, code bases. Because there are lots of things to handle, right? Lots of things can go wrong in the whole process. The user didn't type something, the user didn't type something you wanted him to type. This, that. There's a complex document that comes from the server, in response to which, depending on what the document is, you need to do a whole array of DOM manipulations, right? ये hide करो, वो show करो, error show करो, नहीं करो, अरे error show करना रह गया, ओ अच्छा वापस submit किया तो पहले error वाले divs remove करो, फिर वापस show करो. Basically, almost all your jQuery code that you're writing it to keep this JavaScript में एक document का state and this DOM in sync. Right? You're either trying to pick up the state from the DOM and put it in that JavaScript document and then send it to a server, which is simple, just a $.xhr or $.whatever it's JSON or something, right? That will do. Or you are basically fetching something from the server, and now depending on, hey, it's 202, 3 or 3, 4 or 4, I don't know, whatever, you are trying to sort of manipulate the DOM. And these documents and these can be in various kinds of states, and now your job is to basically figure out how to replicate and keep these states in sync. It's basically, has anyone here written more than 1,000 lines of jQuery in a single web project?
Yeah.
1, 2, 3. It's fairly common. Our main app at Mumbai that has significant portions of code written a while ago in jQuery and Backbone, right? That's probably clocking at, I guess, 2-3K lines of jQuery plus Backbone, if not more, right? And most of it is doing basically this, right? I think I need some water.
This is it.
I got it. So there was this guy called, I think his name is Michiko. I don't know how to pronounce. Michiko, right? Michiko. And Michiko is working at Google on some project, and they were few months into it, and they'd written a few kilo lines of code, and the progress was beginning to slow down. And he was like, you know what, there's a better way to do this. He had been experimenting in his free time with another project where he had sort of played with the idea, and he felt this could actually solve their problem quite nicely. And then they felt that the solution is really nice, so let's just generalize and make it available to everyone, and thus Angular was born. I think circa 2010, I believe, is when.
That and that.
Yeah.
on the same time.
Yeah. So, so what does Angular do differently? Angular says that we notice that, you know, most of the time you're doing the same repetitive task, which is bringing your DOM and your JavaScript in sync, right? Yeah, basically, this is your one main problem. We look at the other solutions. Backbone gives you basically one-way binding, right? You have a document which is a nice JavaScript object called backbone.model. You have a view which is in I don't know, a template or something, which is basically a string. And then you have JavaScript code that can pass this view into a DOM, pick up the fields of this model, and correctly give you the state of the DOM as it should be post this manipulation. Which is great. So it basically takes these two things, the template and the model, the data, and merges that and gives you the DOM, right? That's the problem Backbone essentially solves. But life is much better if you could have it both ways, right? Any changes to your DOM should automatically change the JavaScript object, and any changes in the JavaScript object should automatically reflect in the DOM. If this happened, your life would be very simple, right? Because now all you have to do is you call your XHR request, you get back the data, you put it in a JavaScript variable, and you're done. You're done if your templating library is powerful enough to capture all the DOM states that any arbitrary piece of data could have resulted in. So what is this powerful templating library that we can invent? And here the Angular team realized that we can use HTML itself. Why create another templating language on top of HTML that gets compiled down to HTML? We could just enhance HTML. It's already DOM. A slightly richer DOM would solve the problem. The beauty of HTML and why you write such a less amount of code in HTML to do complex tasks and such a lot of code in JavaScript to do the same tasks is that it's declarative, right? Like here, the code behind that probably says H3 alternator, right? You're not telling the browser how to create H3. You're not saying that take the screen width, take its 10%, this, that, take this font, do this. You're not specifying how to display the H3. You're just telling the browser that dude, I want this displayed as an H3, you figure it out. Right? This is declarative. I'm just declaring I want it so, and there's another code somebody else has written somewhere that figures out how to make it so. But I don't care about that. That's decoupled from me. Right? This is declarative. So if we could declaratively enhance HTML, if we could basically teach it how to resolve simple expressions, we have the most powerful templating language possible already with us, which is just a slightly enhanced HTML. So this is the route Angular takes. So Angular does two basically clever things. One is data binding, which is that, let's say the first, data binding, which is that you have, let me just go back here. This is basically data binding, right? My laptop's going to sleep or something. Yeah. So what's happening here is fairly interesting, right? What's happened here is that Angular's enhanced the HTML into actually a templating engine. Have you used Smarty or something, any templating engine ever?
Yes.
Who has used templating engines before? Any kind of templating engine? Cool. 4. So, five of you. So basically templating engines are this concept that, you specify कि ऐसा दिखना चाहिए, you usually have curly braces or something which describes कि यहाँ पे ये variable का value डाल देना, right? This is basically converted HTML into a templating engine. You're basically writing a small, not complete JavaScript, but a JavaScript subset language here, right? I can say fairly interesting things here. Let me just edit this code on my laptop.
You give a good analogy. I mean, what is a template basically? You've seen a stamp, rubber stamp, you know. The guy changed only the date. The seal to same रहता है. Assume that rubber stamp is your template. Only, and you know, and a curly brace is your date. Because that changed. Every day will be a new date. So you're stamping on it. But the other things are all the same. So template is that. Basically a rubber stamp which has something that will change just to make sure you have a dynamic part. You cool with that?
Yeah. So basically, as he said, templating is this rubber stamp, and the ink is sort of like your data, right? You basically want a green stamp, a blue stamp, a red stamp. The stamp is the same, right? So whatever is common between various displays of your data, you can sort of separate it into the structure and the data part. That's the general concept behind templating, right? So this is the most elegant, in my opinion, templating language out there, HTML, right? HTML itself is an awesome templating language. The DOM itself is actually the best templating tool to it, because every template is trying to generate the DOM. What if you could have something that parses an enhanced DOM and creates DOM out of it? So this is exactly what happens here. If you look at this, what Angular has done is made that into two, right? The source code says this, but Angular has parsed that and created your DOM out of it. Put answer colon 2 there, right? And it can do fairly interesting things with that, like I don't know, something complicated. Yeah, I guess. Can't see me typing, sorry about that. Yeah, so I've changed the that, okay, that didn't work. Wait. This is first example, right? Something converted my single quotes into 39. Yeah, this should work. Oops. Yeah. Cool. So, right, what I've done here, I have set in this templating language, that's set name equal to Anshul, and parse this. This is an object on which I am calling name, right? So what this should resolve to is height. With any luck, it's exactly what we get, right? This is a powerful templating language. This can do fairly complex stuff, right? It's basically a really powerful subset of JavaScript. It has, other than loops, all constructs. It has equality checking, it has booleans, it has number manipulation, it has string manipulation, plus you can define new kinds of manipulations. So this basically is data binding. No, this is not data binding. This is using HTML as a template, right? Let's talk a little bit more about that. So what they felt was that you can go further with this concept. Instead of just making HTML a richer template language, let's also allow users to sort of create new HTML tags that do their own things, or new HTML attributes that add their own functionality, right? Like ng-init does. ng-init is basically an attribute, a new attribute, right? So this in Angular land is called directives, right? This is the first basically magical thing about Angular, which is directives, which is they figured out a way to say things like basically create new attributes. You can go to the JavaScript code, you can create something called an Angular directive, right? Where you can say that when so and so attribute is specified with so and so value, I want this to be done. When that value changes to so and so, I want this to be done. Basically things like that. And you can say that, you know, basically you can now make your own actions declarative, right? We just talked about how HTML, you declare that you want a H3, you don't tell the browser how to do an H3, right? Now let's say I want, I want a car that keeps spinning, or I want a loading GIF, right? So instead of putting an image tag and the whole jQuery that picks up that image tag and does something with it, I can just create a new HTML tag called loading. I will put less than loading, closing loading there, and then in the JavaScript portion, in the Angular portion, I'll describe what loading does, right? Here in the template, I will be completely declarative. So the power of this is reusability, right? Because you're now completely separated out how it does from what has to be done. The what has to be done becomes reusable. You can take the same loading voila directive that you wrote in your Angular, take it to another app, put a loading tag in your HTML, and you're done. You'll have a loading GIF there, right? So this basically is sort of, I think, to me, one of the three most powerful aspects of Angular, directives, which is the ability to create your own HTML tags and your own HTML attributes and have functionality driven through that. This allows you to specify your code declaratively. This one thing by itself probably takes my 100, 200 line code bases into, I don't know, 5, 6 lines, 10 lines max, right? Because the whole repetition goes away. I'm no longer date picker, right? I do not write div class equals date picker and $this pick date picker set these values. I write date picker month equals 200, month equals 12, year equals 2013, and I have once written the date picker directive that just displays that. It's brilliant. It's phenomenal. It like can apps that take days to write become writable in hours, and you have a much cleaner HTML. You have much better life all around because of this. This is directives. The second thing which we sort of talked about, but let's go into more detail about, is data binding, which now takes the other problem, the non-templating part of the problem, which is how do I keep my DOM in JavaScript into sync? Well, very simply, it will always remain in sync. Don't worry about it. In your Angular code, you typically, I think the fourth example would be useful here. Let's look at the source code. This is basically also this. If you know this, you can already do probably 60–70% of everything you need to do in a web app, and this is very simple to learn, right? In Angular, you have something called a module in the JavaScript, which corresponds to an ng app in the HTML source. Okay. Then you have a controller in the JavaScript tied to a module, right? This is chained with the module, right? You have a corresponding thing called ng controller there in your HTML typically, and in this controller is a plain old JavaScript function, nothing special about it. You don't have to extend a class, you have to do nothing special to get this. This comes basically for free, right? It's a pure JavaScript function, no expectations other than that one. It's a pure JavaScript function and it's named correctly. Your whatever facilities you need inside this function, you pass them in as arguments. And Angular will figure out what those dependencies are and pass them on correctly. So I'll come to that in a bit, but for the time being, you basically said that the controller is a function, right? This controller is this function. This function is executed when Angular sort of encounters that ng controller. Okay, so Angular goes, looks through your HTML, finds this ng controller thing, looks for the controller, it finds the controller is the function, it executes the function, passing it something it creates and calls the scope. Right? This $scope gets passed to the controller in JavaScript, and inside this portion, every variable you type is basically bound onto this $scope. Okay, so inside the ng controller element, whatever is the subset of it, anywhere you say curly braces something, if I put, let's say, in fact I can do that and I should. Just give me a moment. Instead of say hi, what I'm going to do is I'm going to put curly braces name there. Yeah, cool. So wherever it encounters curly braces name, that basically is going to refer to $scope.name. Anything that's bound to it via ng model will change the value of $scope.name itself, right? So, and any method being called inside any of the Angular expressions will call $scope.say. As simple as that, right? So, let me make this a bit more clear. Everyone knows what a first class function is? No? Who?
JavaScript is a JavaScript.
Inbuilt function.
Who all know what higher order functions means? What's a higher order function? How many people know what's a higher order function? I guess the same 4 or 5 people, right? So, unlike most programming languages, JavaScript is a language where functions are also sort of objects. They are as valid as your
first class objects.
Sorry?
The first
class functions. Yes. So you can assign a function to a variable, you can pass function in as an argument to another function, which is what's happening here. Let me make this a bit more clear. Hope I don't make a mistake. So, yeah, okay. So, I've just rewritten the same piece of code. This is a regular JavaScript function, and you can assign functions in JavaScript to a variable. So, I've done that here. and app basically is the module, and here I have defined the controller to be that function. Right? I hope this is slightly more readable than what was there before. Right? So basically what you get is two-way binding. Any change made in the Angular JavaScript environment is going to automatically reflect on the DOM, and any change made on the DOM is automatically going to reflect in the JavaScript. You have to do nothing to achieve this. So what does this do? Right now, the JavaScript का $scope.name, यहाँ पे ये controller के अंदर name, all are pointing, all have the same value, Mumbai 1, 2, 3. You can, this is probably, you can in fact check this. Right? So I'm choosing this $. Okay, don't know what is that. So you can my keyboard. This is actually the scope object. It's a plain JavaScript object, nothing novel about it other than that Angular knows about it. That's it. It's a plain JavaScript object which this, which has, this is the scope. Scope has, let me close that again. Right, there you go. So scope, basically it has some properties. All those $ properties are hidden from you. Those are what Angular's maintain to know where to bind things, how to bind things, blah blah blah. And these are the two things you define. This is the name you have defined, and this is the function you have defined, right? And these are stored as is. These are regular JavaScript functions, regular strings, right? There's nothing special about these, and these are completely wrong. If I make it this, and I look at the inspect the scope again, it says move now, right? So inside this inspector, we are seeing what's the JavaScript environment, right? So that $scope variable, these three values are always kept in sync by Angular. You have to do nothing. So now when I click on here, right now it's calling that function on scope called say hi, which basically says hi move. But you could do whatever you want with it. It has access to scope.name. You could send it to a server. You could change it to something else. You could do whatever you want with it. This is two-way data binding. This is also very powerful. This also obviously saves hundreds of lines of codes everywhere, right? The one basic task that you have to do as a JavaScript programmer all the time basically gets taken care of, and correctly. You can bind complex objects, complex object chains, error objects, huge objects to the scope, and you can declare in your so for instance, you could say here, this is ng input, this is input ng model name. I could have ng if $scope name error, then display the name error. Basically, I can declaratively specify the whole template saying that if this particular value exists, show this error object. If it doesn't exist, don't show this object. And when the value changes in the JavaScript from existing to non-existing, it's just going to do the right thing. I don't have to tell it to remove that DOM element, insert it back, whatever. It's just not do it. I can just declaratively specify what to do with the scope there, and I can just maintain the scope. My JavaScript $scope suddenly becomes the single source of truth. I do not have to do DOM manipulation. I can live without jQuery. I do not have to do a $p ever again. I don't even need to know that the guy there is called input who's displaying my name, or it's a button that is showing the name right now. Tomorrow you want to show 10 buttons with the name, just copy paste that button there. The JavaScript does not have to change, it doesn't need to know about it, it doesn't know about it, right? You need to do something complex with that name, you want to uppercase it, downcase it to whatever, just do it in the template, do it wherever. The JavaScript doesn't need to know, and this is very, very powerful. This is the second magical thing about Angular. The first one is directives, which is teaching HTML new tricks, right? Basically allowing you to create tags of your own, attributes of your own. The second magical thing about Angular is data binding. Free data binding, basically. Free, lightweight data binding that is not messy, works flawlessly pretty much everywhere. You can bind to expressions. As I showed you 1 plus 1, I could do $name plus something there. When this changes, it's going to change that too. You don't have to do that recalculation, Angular will do it for you. So this is powerful. The third powerful thing about Angular is dependency injection. So this $scope, right? So Angular has this concept of services. Okay, no, wait, before we go there. There's another clever thing here, right? So the clever thing here is that this whole controller and module mechanism is itself implemented using directives, right? This ng-app, it's a directive too. This ng controller is a directive too. Angular is not doing anything special or anything new to make this work. It's just being able to use the same primitives that it's providing us to achieve this, right? ng bind, it's a directive. I could write a directive like that myself. This or ng model is here, right? ng model, it's a directive. And all 10-15 lines of code, even in the Angular original code base. This is an extremely powerful concept. Similarly, the third thing that messes up code bases, right, is dependencies. Sooner or later, in your JavaScript code base, once it begins to get complicated, you start depending on a lot of things, right? You have, I don't know, this library, you have underscore, you have this, you start having tons and tons of
third party.
Yeah, third party stuff, your own stuff, right? You basically want to, so you're maintaining, let's say you're showing the user his exam, right? I mean, exam result or something like that. Let's say I'm doing an Angular page. My company Mumbai basically does learning software, JEE test preparation right now. So, exam, right? I have an exam, I have to show the exam result to the user. So, I have this nice JavaScript function somewhere, right? Which is communicating with the server, which is specialized to basically go fetch the result from the server and store it in an object. And there are 10 different things in my app that need to access this object, right? So how do we go about it? The first obvious way is to go with a global or a class system, right? Kind of how badly written Backbone usually does it, or a lot of other frameworks do it, right? Where basically I would say, I would have a function somewhere and I would say new exam result somewhere, and then I will have maybe, it will be a, I don't know, I guess singleton function or something. It will return the object, and everywhere I need the exam result, I would do a new exam result, right? This is sort of bad. This is bad because suddenly your exam result becomes coupled with everywhere it's being used. I can't rename exam result. I cannot change its constructor. I cannot change its uh, format. I cannot change its arguments. I can't. It basically this is directly calling my dependency, right? This is making your function aware of sort of a global state. There's a global state somewhere where there's a class defined, but it's still global, right? That's why I'm being able to access it arbitrarily. And generally, global state is bad. You should not have global state because it's polluting. And why is global state bad? Global state is bad because it's inflexible, right? Once you specify it, once you have made something global, it's like publishing. There's no changing it later. There's no, being able to deal with it in exclusion of the rest of the world, right? So that is problematic. So what Angular does is, Angular has this nice concept of modules, which is again the same module that's being used here, and a concept of services, right? Just like I can do a module.controller, I can do a module.service or a module.factory, and it will give me these nice injectable services. So if I specify a function and its arguments are called $scope and $unsure, right? Or $scope and unsure, and pass it to app.controller, Angular will look for a service called unsure and a service called $scope and pass that into the function. Just by the name of the function arguments, it's going to discover your services, it's going to instantiate them, and it's going to give them to your controller. This is dependency injection. And this is the third, I think, crucial way in which Angular really changes the way you write your code, right? This is very far removed from, this basically makes jQuery feel like Stone Age, right? Because suddenly your whole state is being maintained in JavaScript. You don't have to do DOM manipulation. DOM gets auto-maintained. Life is really elegant and simple. It could not be better. On top of that, this kind of a function can be tested in isolation. I can call this function passing it a random object, an object that is not the real service, and see what that function does to that service. I could write a test which calls this function with another object and see what happened to that object. Did that object got .name and say hi functions attached to it? Does the say hi function do what it says it does? Cool. This piece of code is not even aware of the norm. It has no dependencies outside what are being passed onto it. This is a pervasive concept in Angular. It's everywhere. Dependencies are always injected in the Angular world. They are never fetched from a global state. This has a lot of nice properties, and these three things together basically sort of make Angular magical, and also basically literally code that I used to take days to work on becomes minutes, seconds, ceases to exist basically because I don't have to do it anymore, right? It's beautiful, it's elegant. So that's a brief intro to Angular.
Good. The point also I want to put out with this, the major part why we go for frameworks is structure. Otherwise, if you put jQuery all over the place, okay, that's the major thing of structure. And second part is this: the dependencies. What he's saying, injection. I don't know whether you know Martin Fowler, Uncle Bob. Do you know these chaps? In architecture, I mean, whatever they had
Design
something. These are the guys, and they had this something known as during 10 years back when you're building desktop, they had something plugins. How do you put plugins in? And how do you do it without breaking your code base, going to a whole lot of refactoring? And then they came with these kind of patterns: immersion, control, and the second part of that is dependency control.
Yeah.
This is how you do. Okay, there's a bit of history. I mean, what he's saying is that, but there's a history of how it's come through here and why we've chosen that path. Why these guys, the smart guys at Google, and they're not going to be doing stupid things. They're going to make sure how things are easier and remember, Mishko and these guys, they actually all from Eastern Europe guys. The three of them all have a very heavily accented English if you speak with them. The reason they have gone for this is because they themselves are having trouble doing this. They say, why am I doing these repetitive tasks? That's how they build up this. Angular for that reason. Okay?
This pattern generally where instead of knowing what your dependency is called and calling it, but instead of that being told what your dependency is called inversion of control. This is the inversion of control pattern, and this is the what's called the constructor implementation of it rather than the setter implementation.
I don't want to go further because I just want to know how much your water was tested. So he's right, what he's saying is all that one. But go and read about these things. These are, you build up why it's happened and how. It's interesting reading if you have a good literature for it, and it's really good stuff to go into.
So the plan sort of what I had in mind was to explain how Angular implements the startup binding, implements this dependency injection directives by going to the Angular source code, seeing how it does it. But I think that probably will
maybe we'll make it next month.
Yeah, maybe.
You see, at least now you've got a good base to take it for the next time. What do you do next time? In the meantime, at least you can also work with, play around with the Angular. So you have a good, it's free, everything is there, you can just download it. So you have Chrome. So that's done, that's actually IDE now, okay, for Angular and all that stuff. Check out also ADI Osmani is a human project. They have, generators just for these Angular guys. So all your scaffolding, everything is taken care of. So you don't know how to write. What he's saying about reducing code is getting reduced much more further.
Yeah. And there's this website called Egghead, and there's Thingster.
.io.
Yeah. Just let Google find it for me.
No, that is all I know.
Yeah.
And there's also Mean.io though, Mean.io if you want to try that. That's a full JS stack.
Yeah, even I started with that only.
No, that is a move further. That is a whole server and client on JS. So you'll have to know Node. Actually, you will not start with Angular, you'll first start with Node. Make sure your Node is very strong. Then you go to Angular and make it, that's a better part.
So these are really excellent tutorials, Thingster.io and Egghead.io. They have very short videos, Egghead.io, and Thingster has really good tutorials. Any time you spend on these, I promise you, will save you tons of coding time in your life.
Thingster.io also has an app that is great. Just see, learn how to build a regular app. That would be a better, just expanded, Angular JS tutorial, learn to build real-time apps with Fire, all this. Learn to build modern apps. These are the ones. Start with these two. These are the battle links. What I have initially. So you'll know how to. I think so. It's an NFL. If I'm not mistaken, these apps. National Football League. NFL teams in US.
Okay.
This is how they build it. So I think so. You all want, you can make an IPL team. Okay, then you know why I really understood what I'm supposed to do here. Good. Is that it? Yeah.
So, thanks a lot, everyone.
Just one question.
Yeah.
So, Angular templates, how are they not conflicting with the Django templating?
With the
Django template or any server-side templating language?
So you typically, your server-side templating language is usually very capable of
switch on the
creating
lights.
HTML, right?
Yes,
So, because when I say double colon name, so it is, I say the same thing for Django also and for Angular also. So it will work automatically.
So I'm a Rails guy. I don't know why Django templates use curly braces. They use curly braces themselves.
Yes.
But I'm sure they can also render curly braces, right? So whatever output they are creating needs to look like that, right? Basically, the output should look like this. After that, and any templating system on the server side worth its salt will allow you to create any kind of HTML soup, right? So the job of the server side template then just becomes rendering this kind of a soup, so that Angular can in the client side pick it up and do things with it.
Also, there is also separation of talent. Okay, basically, when you see templating, who is going to do this? Mostly designers. They are not coders, and you don't want them also to know that. Basically, you just have to put this. They are just introducing a template. You give them a template, They do all their photoshopping, whatever from your Dreamweaver, that's what they do.
Yeah, and then you go, you attach ng tags over it, and some of your own attributes, and it just works.
Cool.